Look, oh, look at this. Oh, this is awesome. Let me go get the other camera so you can have a better view. Before we go tearing our engine out, I want to do some evaluation on the front suspension. One of the main reasons that I got this car so cheap is that the previous owner was having all kinds of front suspension issues. Now, we're probably going to go through most of this and replace a lot of it anyway, but I want to make sure that as we go forward, we have a game plan in case we need to source some parts that are hard to come by, or we need to spend a little more time and money rehabbing some of the existing parts. Now, you may remember we had a ton of oxidation issues. We had some upper strut tower bushing issues, some bolts that didn't match. I even found where it looks like the dust shield at the back had been rubbing the rotor so much that it worn completely through. And there's some new hardware, so we know some of this has been replaced really recently. Something else that kind of struck me odd is if you look through one of these wheel bolt openings in the rotor, you see some Phillips head screws. And that's not a super common VW thing. Next move, let's get the brake caliper and caliper carrier all the way off. As I mentioned in the video about how to buy an R32, workmanship is one of my biggest concerns when we have a car with high mileage that's a bit older and we know some work has been done recently. Let's get this T30 out and get the rotor off. We'll inspect the rotor once we have it on the bench. I mean, it's gonna need to be replaced anyway, but I still like to take a good look at it in case we have any weird pad wear issues. All right, with the rotor off, immediately I see a couple of things. One, this is not a factory wheel bearing. That may have absolutely nothing to do with what we have going on, but I always like to note when something's not a factory part. The factory one doesn't have these 3 Phillips head screws in it. I assume this is holding the ABS ring onto the wheel hub. Otherwise, I don't see what the point is, but I think I found the issue. Look at this. Someone left part of a sandwich in our brake suspension setup. So, I don't know, maybe if you lost your sandwich, here it is. I'm actually going to go ahead and bolt the caliper loosely back on a little bit with the rotor off. We still need to do a little bit more thorough inspection on said rotor, but I'm probably gonna take the shock absorber assembly out, so I want this secured. Oh, by the way, these reusable zip ties are outstanding. I'll link up in the description for you guys. I use them all the time. Ugh, this is heavy. Let's go ahead and get our sway bar end link off as well. If I remember right, that had some unhappiness too. Oh yeah, she's completely come apart. We can also go ahead and get our wiring and everything off of that shock absorber because we're gonna take it out of the car, I think. We'll take the nut out of the top of the shock absorber assembly. Then we'll take the bolt that goes through the knuckle and through the strut out. We'll take the spreader tool and open that up a little bit. And then hopefully with a little jiggling and wiggling, we can get this shock absorber assembly out of the car. All right, finally got the shock absorber assembly out of the car. Ended up having to take the lower ball joint bolts out and the tie rod end off. The lower ball joint was kind of a pain in the butt because, well, it has this hardware in it, and this is not factory hardware. From the factory, the ball joint actually has a stud, so it's pressed into the ball joint with the threads hanging out the bottom. These bolts, they fit in there. I'm imagining the person that put this all together probably had to fight to get them in, which should be a sign that you're not using the right thing. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. We'll get that straightened out at some point. I don't think that was really the cause of our issue. You can see here, this brake rotor is just like, it's trash. Look at the backside wasn't even making contact through most of the rotor. So these are gonna go in the garbage. I actually have another set of slotted rotors that are in much better condition that I'll probably put on just in the meantime, just to move the car around. I don't know, maybe I'll just throw this back on because who really cares? For our shock absorber assembly, one thing I noticed pretty early is that it's actually not seated all the way. The spring is not seated in the shock absorber, so we may have done that when taking the bolt loose, but it's pretty tight. So I'm guessing part of the reason we had that elevated height in the top of the strut tower is that, one, the spring is not all the way seated in this spring seat. Two, the shock absorber wasn't fully seated in the knuckle. There was a couple millimeters gap between this bottom portion and there's a small seat inside the knuckle that this is supposed to sit on. I was initially worried about the strut bearing not being correct or being collapsed. It looks like it's probably okay. I'm gonna take it over to the spring compressor and just take a better look at all this stuff and make sure it's still in good condition. You can see we got some pretty good oxidation on our spring here. But anyway, we are going to compress the spring, check all this stuff, and then we're gonna put the spring back in the right way. Normally I would use this socket right here like we did for the top nut. However, because that nut that holds the strut bushing on is so far down in there, my gap with this and the socket through it means that the Allen is pushed all the way up against the back of the socket. So I could cut this down and then it would work totally fine. However, being kind of on the lazy side and not feeling like cutting it, I have a 21mm socket that fits on there, cut to put a wrench on the end of it, and a long Allen that'll go right through it. Well, after trying several different times to get that out, it's on there super tight. If you are doing something like this and you plan on reusing the shock absorber, do not do what I'm about to do. If it's getting replaced, well, it doesn't really matter. All right, so check out the inside of our strut bushing. It's kind of boogered up. Oh, look at our bearing. Look at this. Oh, this is awesome. Let me go get the other camera so you can have a better view. So we have our bushing, our nut, and our bearing. It actually goes in the car just like that. So we saw the little boogeriness in our bushing right here. That is not that horribly big of a deal. Like, you're probably not gonna have any kind of drivability or suspension noise just with that little bit of weirdness in the bushing. It's gonna get replaced anyway, but that's not what I found. That is one of those eureka moments. Look at this bearing. So this bearing sits inside of the bushing like that, and then when you turn the wheel, it turns, gets your thumb stuck. When you turn the wheel, it keeps the bearing stationary and lets the shock absorber turn. But look at, well, this fell off, but it's destroyed. This is part of the bearing cage right here. Let's just take this apart. I think I have another one that we can put in just temporarily. We'll get a screwdriver. Holy cow, look at that. It is just straight up destroyed. Oh my gosh, it gets worse the more I look at it. This is just a plastic cage on the top here, but oh, my balls, my bearing balls. Oh my gosh, look at all that. This, my friends, minus the little bearing balls, should be one piece. Holy cow. Well, previous owner, if you were having noises while turning, I'm guessing that probably had a whole heck of a lot to do with it. Holy smackers. Now, we would have replaced this part no matter what, but how much fun is it to actually figure out one of the things going on? I mean, there's just dirt caked in here. The grease is all nasty. Look at how worn that is. That should just be one round piece. I'm gonna go see if I can find a good one. All right, so here is another strut bearing. Now this is a used one. We can see the plastic shell is cracked. It might actually be missing some ball bearings, but for the sake of what we're doing today, this is going to be a perfect example. So look at this. This piece looks like it's probably pressed together, but it might actually still be two pieces. Look at the inside. Look, it's got jagged edges on it. Jagged edges, and ball bearings do not go happily together, my friends. And then this piece, this outer surround piece, is several outer surround pieces. All right, so we've established that we got some pretty significant problems. One thing I see often though is somebody finds something like this and stops and doesn't keep going in their investigation. Look at the top of this hat that goes over the strut, and then the strut bushing kind of sits on it just like that. It's actually tweaked. You might not be able to see it, but it's tweaked like right here. And of course the underside is all rusted and stuff. So we'll be getting a new one of these. But something else that I found is because of the way that bearing was, look at how chewed up the top of the shock absorber is. I have never seen one like that before. That is just crazy. These are the same shock absorbers that I put on my blue R32, and everything obviously fit right in together. So holy smackers. All these things together, no wonder they were having some suspension issues. So this is definitely gonna have to get replaced along with all this other stuff that we've taken out, springs included. We'll probably go coilovers anyway, or who knows, maybe we'll put a lift kit on the car. How much fun is it to actually figure out what the problem is? Had we not taken this all apart, most likely what would have happened is the whole assembly would have just went to recycle, and we would have never learned this about the car. So this is awesome. Even though the end result's gonna be the exact same, I love, 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 love stuff like this. Let's get it back together and back in the car, at least in a manner where the car is drivable and movable. Take our spreader tool and get that knuckle spread a little bit. Also, for the sake of making my life a little easier, I snipped a bit of the ear off of the lower part of the shock absorber. That's a no-no if you're going to be, installing this like for real, but this is just to get the car mobile, so yeah, it's not a big deal. All right, we'll get our spreader tool out of there. Spreader tool. Managed to wrangle up this suspension. Next, I'll put the tie rod end back up in the knuckle. I was gonna hook up the sway bar end link, but this thing's trashed and it's gonna need to get replaced anyway, so I'm just gonna take the old one out. After that, let's go ahead and get our brakes put back together. So we found multiple problems, and that really shouldn't come as any surprise. We knew there was going to be multiple things just on our visual inspection. I'll tell you though, I've seen a lot of bad strut bearings. I don't think I've ever seen one quite so destroyed from who knows what. That could have easily been a workmanship issue and somebody just sent the ugga-duggas when installing the shock absorbers. It could have just been old. I mean, who knows how long some of these parts have been in this car. This car's got 216,000 miles on it, so shouldn't come as a surprise that there's a whole lot of worn out things. And even though really like all this stuff was gonna get taken care of and replaced anyway, I love the fact that we're able to spend a few extra minutes, take some things apart, and figure out the root cause of the problem. To my fellow technicians, this is one thing you can do to really level up as a technician, to learn root causes of failures, not just it's got a bad strut bearing or a bad shock absorber or anything like that. Actually go in and do the diagnosis instead of just throwing new parts on it. So I got the car reasonably put back together anyway. No new hardware, nothing's torqued down properly. Everything's just kind of tight at this point. All this stuff's gonna be coming back apart. You saw the damage to the shock absorber, so that's gotta get replaced anyway. Next up, the car's gonna come back in the shop. We'll pull the engine, pull the transmission, separate the two, doing a full engine teardown because we are going to need to put some high performance goodies on it. With that, I'm out. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you again next time. Gotta put the wheel on. Aftermarket wheel bearing. I've never seen one with the Phillips head screws. So after resetting the spring in the seat properly and getting a new-ish, better quality anyway, strut bearing, look at the difference in gap at the top of the strut tower compared to what we had before. Before, I could fit my whole hand in there. Now we barely have any gap at all. Still gonna need all those parts replaced, but that's a good sign that we were on to the right problem.